Cool. So today is our sync up for uh, Wednesday, February 10th, Thursday here in Australia. That's always confusing, but
I know, right?
so let's get into it. We'll start off at UX research because there's more points around there. So I can kick off the first point there. So last Friday, I kicked off the unmoderated user testing for navigating to settings. So I wrapped up the insights yesterday, so I'll be sharing that with the team later today. But yeah, I think from an unmoderated sense, a lot of the tasks were go from this page, get to settings, make the change, and then the idea was come back. Not a lot of people came back, whereas I think that's something to take forth with unmoderated tests that people are used to just like going, reaching the goal, and like calling it a day. So, and plus, no one noticed my little back mechanism. So yeah, we'll probably have to do another solution validation on how to get back to the page that you're on. So yeah, and that's me for that point. So, Catherine, you want to go on with your other points?
Sure. Yeah, so I have maybe one that might not be able to be answered here, since it's just you and me. But the first one is about the project level settings tree test that I did. So a benchmarking study for that. And that one actually turned out to be very interesting. So the insights are in progress, but they're mainly kind of wrapped up. Almost, I have to like go through some of the open text feedback as well. But just to give that context for this call, the goal of that test was to start getting a sense of this question of where do settings belong, or where do users expect to do certain tasks related to settings. So, of course, with a tree test, you're not seeing them in action, kind of navigating to different parts. But the goal here was just to see, did they think to go to that feature area or to go to settings for that task? And basically, what I was seeing was kind of like a mixture of behavior. That it really, there were cases where it seemed like the the task was more strongly associated with the feature area. For example, customizing a pipeline configuration was more associated with CI/CD pipelines. But then there were other more general things that were pretty strongly associated with settings, like setting up a repository mirror or setting like things related to the countdown timer in the incidents issue or things like that that seem to be more related to settings. So that's an example of something we could dig into more in a follow-up study where we do workflow interviews to kind of understand why someone is going to one area versus another. But this tree test kind of just gave us some initial look into the data. And I think two things that stood out for me, since it's just the two of us, I'll go into it a little bit more. But two things that stood out for me was this confusion between settings in general and settings repository popping up again. Um, Again, for merge request approval rules, and then also in another area. So, this kind of concept of our settings being in these different subcategories that don't always make it easy for users to determine which one to go into because they think, well, it could logically belong in both places. And then another area was just the case where the task success rate was actually very low, but upon clicking closer into it, it was because, again, of going from one setting area to another category. So they first clicked on settings, but they got lost along the way in trying to find the right place. So it's definitely showing something around these subcategories with settings that they could be improved, but also showing that we could also have the information in multiple locations that might make sense to users. So that has been an interesting study. Feel free to check out the insights that are in progress, but I'll also let you know once I've kind of wrapped that up as well.
All right, cool. That's interesting. You brought up the thing about merge requests inside general. One thing that Pedro kind of linked me to was that like in the CMS studies, one recommendation was already looking at putting merge requests into its own page. That's something our group was considering in the past
Right.
doing. And then in this latest solution validation of mine, I actually experimented with the idea of putting merge requests into a separate page and seeing if people can discover it. And yeah, people went to like general, but then saw merge requests in the left nav. And yeah, I think it works if the left nav is open. If the left nav is closed, then like, yeah, good luck. So that's kind of like a dangerous
Right.
game.
Right. Yeah, it definitely is an interesting one because for the merge request approvals task, it basically had a lot of splits. People looking in settings repository, people looking in the merge requests, uh, the top level item, the merge requests in just the project area, and
Hmm.
then settings general. And then also some people looking in members. That was interesting as well. But probably kind of thinking of team members and approvers, the people, they might have thought to go to members. That was also
Mm.
an interesting pattern. And just a couple of them clicking on security and compliance. So
Hmm.
it definitely seems to be more centered around this problem that we're just talking about. Like, do we create a merge request category, and does that kind of increase the issue where you have settings general, merge request, and repository, which could potentially have other settings that are related and might seem
Mm.
confusing. But we'd be clarifying merge request approvals by adding a new merge request
Hmm.
category. So it's kind of interesting. Definitely more to explore there in terms of the category names of the
Mm.
settings and kind of how they're all grouped together. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I would say.
Could you post the link that you this this research piece? Um, the insights is here, but do you have the link to the actual issue? Because I want to leave a few comments about exploring the idea of where things have their own place, like what you're doing right now. Like, where should these things live in their category? But then
Right.
the 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 edge cases where it could live in multiple places, but things can't live in multiple places. It has to live in one. But like, how do we expose pathways to the other spots? For example, if I'm like looking at repository stuff, yeah, it might make sense to look at merge request things, but maybe it's not like a main thing, but there's like a related links or like other pathways from there to like, oh, I'm looking at members, but oh, I want to look at rules
Yeah.
for these members. Oh, okay, it's not in this page, it's in another page. So rather than making people guess where to go, which is what we're doing right now, we're actually providing signposting and saying like, oh, cool, like if you're looking for member organizations, you're in the right spot. But if you're wrong, like follow this link here, and it'll take you to where you need to go.
Yeah.
And that is like a combination of IA and navigation that I think is um, could be useful. I don't see a lot of applications doing that, but it's something to think about. I think it's in the execution of how we do it.
Yeah. I agree. That's definitely something to think about because I feel like for example, when it goes to settings repository, if they were actually looking at the settings pages and they clicked on repository, they'd then see repository files. Um, that may not really lead them to the context of approvers, even if their
Mm,
initial association between approvers and repository was strong. When
mhm,
you actually get to the content that currently lives under repository, it might not really have made sense to them.
mhm,
Because right now it's just files, commits, branches, and things like that. So
mm,
as opposed to clicking on, I don't know, the merge request area, then you're like merge requests and merge request approvals. So there's definitely some interesting things about the actual content they're seeing, the actual pages they're on, and basically the context. So like we were
mm,
talking about contextual access to settings and whatnot. I think what I plan to get into next is more around this content audit. So seeing the content that we have in this left sidebar and where it leads to, and the workflows that are kind of being accommodated by this content, I think that will start to help with
Mm.
mapping out where these different things and touch points should be, because it's definitely it's a complex problem. I feel like
Hmm.
it is like ever more complex every day, but we'll get there. But yes, let me find that issue. There are basically two of them, and I will use the one that is most recent because I'm going to leave an update in the old one so that I can close it. Let me find it. But yeah, this is also something, because right now I'm doing some IA work for the doc side as well. So I'm just basically in IA land right now. And I'm seeing some similar patterns that are basically the result of the structure of our GitLab.com left sidebar, kind of reflecting in the docs. And in docs, they have some patterns where a link will open in two places. That's interesting. It's kind of confusing to me, but I could also see how it may or may not be helpful. I don't know. I'm on the fence about it. But for
Can you explain
example,
to me how, yeah, how does the link open in two places?
I will show you because I was
Yeah.
like, what's going on here? This is a little bit weird to me. It's like, because when you do IA research, sometimes they'll tell you, if people are first clicking on two different things, like there was an even distribution of people clicking on CI/CD and settings, they might suggest putting the content in both places because both of those have like an association. But there are a couple cases where it's a little weird, like for actually, I almost ruined it. Where would you think to find contribution analytics for a group?
Analytics or contributions.
Basically. Okay, so these are some first thoughts. So
Yeah.
let's go into
Project level.
project level. Mm,
Nope.
not here.
I lose. So I guess I'll go into contributions.
Contributions is GitLab contributions, and developer, it's just development docs. How to
Okay.
contribute to GitLab. So, any last thoughts on where you can find some contribution analytics?
Contribution analytics. So just to clarify, this is like to understand current contributions being made right now. Like so
Yeah, like maybe all the contributions that are being made in one of your
to
groups.
GitLab docs. Okay. I give up, to be
Okay,
honest, because
so
I thought it'd be in one of these two things. Yeah.
so you were getting close,
Yeah.
but it was one more level down to analytics group level contribution.
I see.
And then this is where well, to me, the weird pattern shows up where it's also highlighted in groups contribution analytics. So there's like
Okay.
this double
Is it the
location thing
same?
going
Is it the
on.
same? Is it the same content or?
It's the same content. I was like, strange. See, this is kind of strange to me because it's like, why? I don't know.
Well, you know why? So why I think it is understandable in the sense that because it could live at these two places, like um that's why I think the why is there. I think the execution, like if it's the is it the same URL?
Oh, good question. The one is so yes, it is. It is the same URL. So this is a case where it's the same URL. There's some cases where they'll have an explanation of the section and they'll link out to it. But in this case, they just share the same page.
Mm,
And I think
very interesting.
it's the same for another one of these two. I found two like that. and I was like, huh, I did
Huh.
not I
Hmm.
did not expect that. But I understood why it was that way, but there was something about it that was off to me or strange to me, is
Hmm.
basically how I
I
felt.
like that it takes you to the same URL, but when they do it, it doesn't look like it's like uh, there's like a page change and everything, so it feels like you're going to another page. Because if you click onto the other one, it just doesn't switch the left-hand menu. It kind of like goes away some of it.
Yeah. There
But
was
both are
okay,
highlighted. Wait, both are highlighted now. That's even wilder. Uh,
yeah, both are highlighted and you don't know that it's the other one's highlighted unless you click on it.
Yeah, unless you're us.
Unless
I
you're
know.
us, basically. And the other one like this is issue analytics.
Hmm.
Um, I think it's either under issues or it's well, where is it? There's another place
Projects?
that it lives.
No,
It could
no,
be
no,
it
it
could
won't
be
be under here.
projects.
No.
Okay, we're is a little meta right now. I know it's somewhere else. Let me refer.
Okay.
Oh, aha! See, this is another. This is the live of the problems that come across. It's group level, not project level.
Mm, mm.
Um, So it's in both
Uh,
locations here
uh,
as well. So far, I've only seen this with the analytics. I don't know if it's happening in other parts of the docs, but
mhm,
this was something interesting.
mm. Very interesting. What like looking at this is like what I was suggesting earlier about related items and related links to other areas. That's like one solution to solve this problem. This is another solution to solve this problem. Of like things that could live in multiple places, but should only live in one. I see value in both, but like this execution's a little bit like it's not common to see. The idea of like two links leading to the same spot, but making it look like they're the same thing, not like a here's a cross link to another area. Huh.
Yeah, I think that's probably like if I wasn't trying to show it to you, it
Yeah,
probably would make more sense to me because I wouldn't even open this other one.
yeah,
So this is the
exactly.
only one
Yeah.
I'd be thinking about,
Hmm.
even though it
Yeah,
secretly lives there
yeah,
too. But it
yeah.
also brings up the question of like, why is this analytics category
Because
potentially needing to? Does there need to be some type of improvement to the overall categorization, or is this fine? I don't know, but
I think this is like when you're looking at the workflow stuff, it's like there's going to be some overlaps, right? So if you're optimizing for a workflow, someone interested in looking at analytics stuff, putting all the analytics stuff, including issue analytics at the group level, because that's where a person looking at analytics would expect to see it. Makes a lot of sense from the user perspective. But like also at the same time, if I'm managing groups or like controlling groups, I want to see the epics and like controlling my group import tools. I want to learn all about the features that groups has, and like cool, I can look at issue analytics. It from a user perspective, it makes a lot of sense. From a IA kind of like
yeah,
the URLs are the same, so the SEO part is cool, I think. But it's just yeah, the IA or the visual execution is probably an area to potentially improve. Uh, but yeah, I think at the moment, I get it from a user perspective. Like I think in this scenario, I
yeah.
would put like if I was going to show one as a cross link, it would be the analytics is the group level analytics link within the analytics cross links to this issue analytics because it ultimately lives under groups.
Mm.
But then someone from the analytics group will probably argue with me and say, no, these are analytics that are from group things, so it belongs to us.
Right.
So,
It's super interesting. Basically, what I found during this whole thing is that I think analytics and settings might have some similar patterns and potential problems going on in them. where they both have like the breakdown. And in analytics, it's even trickier because sometimes you don't really know what specific analytics you're looking for in general, because they're very one last thing before we move on to the other points. It's just like some things like insights. Who knows what could be in insights versus code review analytics versus issue analytics. These are very specific, but insights is
Mm-hmm.
just like this one that almost could encapsulate all of them, but it's like its
Mm-hmm.
own specific thing as well. And then you have merge requests that is also specific. It's just an interesting thing going on under here. And I saw a similar pattern. People kind of like, what is under what?
Mm.
Um, anyway, that is the end of that rant. I don't even know. I don't even remember why that rant started. I think it was just,
It,
I don't know. I'll let you move on to your point.
I'm good. So, so does that cover that point in the agenda? So, yeah, you had one more question about feature flags.
Yeah, I was hoping that Roman was going to be on the call, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking maybe we can talk about this next time with
Yeah.
Eric as well.
Mm-hmm. So your question is about like turning on feature flag. Which feature were you thinking about in that scenario?
So basically, when I was talking with Adam, our research director, he was kind of
Mm-hmm.
suggesting potentially doing a longitudinal study. So a set of changes, whether we were making kind of like a set of changes to the left sidebar, or a set of,
Mm.
or for example, the set of changes you'll make to the top nav bar,
Mm-hmm.
if that those could be kind of tested with a set of people before their launch to
Mm-hmm.
the wider, basically everyone. So there are basically two ways. You could just roll them out, get some initial feedback, and then roll it out for everyone, or you could do a longitudinal approach where you have someone kind of use it over time and see the experience over time, like how they feel about it. The initial
Mm.
point, kind of like a midpoint, and then at that last point. If you're
Mm-hmm.
more interested in measuring the value of the change and things like that, I think
Mm.
that approach would make sense, but it could be a little tricky depending on the timing of everything and the
Mm.
resources that we have to implement a set of changes together,
Mm.
because that's a big lift. So it's kind of
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. I think what we can do is just raise that as a question in Slack, and then I'll raise the question, and I'll ping Roman to see if he can give some input, because yeah, you're right. We are able to control it at a group level for sure. Uh, whether multiple different users across different organizations, like how that might work, that's probably a more challenging bit. But yeah, I don't know too much about the details of how much we can control
Yeah,
our
that's
groups.
what I'm thinking as well. I mean, because if it's not really possible to do it in a beta testing way, I guess
Mm.
that's another way to think about it, where someone is using this navigation for their own
Mm-hmm.
work and day-to-day life, and they give
Mm-hmm.
feedback on it. Then the other good option would be to have it in a project or a group where someone can go in and just like test it and play around with it and give us feedback on it. That would also be helpful
Mm.
too. It just wouldn't have that longitudinal aspect.
Mm. Cool. So would you see this being part of the release process, as in like we would run this for a few
It's
like
it's it's a little, yeah,
weeks?
it's a little tricky because
Mm.
to do it the right way,
Mm.
the research way, it would be a longer. It would be kind of like a beta test, or I guess a pre-release process
Mm.
where
Mm-hmm.
you're testing it,
Mm-hmm.
and then after that period you release it to everybody.
Yeah.
But I'm not
Well,
sure what engineering would think, and like the effort to do such a thing with a potential to roll back certain changes, like
Mhm.
what they would think about that whole
Yeah.
thing.
You know what would be interesting to kick off this conversation is perhaps create an issue around what you would want to study longitudinally with, let's say, navigation changes, and
Yeah,
then use that as the catalyst for our engineering partners to then look at solutions of how we might be able to achieve this, like kind of
okay,
scoping out the release. Because I think whether it can be done or not, the answer, I'm like hunch, like yes. So like
yeah, I have a hunch
let's
that it's
assume
a yes, but it's
that it's possible. But I think it'll give us more power and like kind of help push the idea along if there's like a purpose to this, in the sense that like, okay, this is what we want to learn and this is how we're going to achieve it, like, with the longitudinal studies. Like, what's that gap between doing a longitudinal study, diary studies or constant feedback or something like that? Like, what do we want to get out of this? Is it like testing the categorization of the left nav, or is it everything in, like, these
yeah,
users get all the features in our navigation updates? And yeah, so that would be my recommendation, is that, like, yeah, let's take that idea of like, what do you as a researcher want to do with your longitudinal study, and then just put that in an issue. I don't think it has to be like fully fleshed out, and at least that gives like, okay, this is the context of what we want to do. um
yeah, yeah, and I think that will become a little bit clearer as I am able to come up with a list of just things for us to either, work on design or implement. Like
mhm,
there's still like at the end of all this benchmarking research, there's now the phase of kind of distilling it down into potential improvements that might
mhm,
still need a design phase, or they might be
yeah,
ready to change in because they're just like certain patterns that could be changed.
mhm,
I guess simply. So I don't
yeah,
know. I need to do a bit more organizing of everything and then
mhm,
discussing that with you, and then
yeah,
like I think we can dive into this. But
yeah,
Adam was curious about this topic, so I wanted to
yeah.
ask you
Yeah,
about it.
I think technically it might be possible. Like, doesn't seem too far-fetched, but yeah, I think having an issue along with this will help. And I know that the engineers are keen to get feedback on the things that they're doing. And I think this is a great way to like get that feedback and make any necessary changes before we roll it out bigger. So yeah, from
Yeah,
yeah, cool.
yeah. Okay, awesome. So I ended up taking a bunch of time, so feel free to go into your points, or if you have to drop off, feel free as well.
Yeah.
Whatever you feel like doing.
Yeah, so on my side, a bit slow on the fine tuning of the epic around the consolidation of projects, groups, and more. The thing that I didn't find enough time to work on is just what this might look like in the mobile view. So I'm looking to tackle that today and tomorrow. Today, and so hopefully have something for uh, the team to review over the next few days on that. The other thing I wanted to bring up quickly was that, like, this week there was a lot more discussions around editors for myself. So I've been pretty
Right.
deep into the world of settings and navigation. So editors have kind of like been on the back of my mind, but this week, yeah, talked about them a little bit more. And one thing that I was talking to my manager Marcel was about, this idea where we're looking at making all the editors use like editor light as a foundational piece. So I'm just going to share my screen and I'll just walk you through the thought
Cool.
process of what was going on there. Cool. So where we're at was like this idea of the static site editor being a rich text editor, and we were really focusing heavily on the editing experience, like how do I write Markdown? How do I make writing Markdown a lot easier for people? And yeah, with Editor Lite, the possibility comes that we can start putting some of that rich textness inside a comment box. And that was like a kickoff discussion that was happened maybe like 2 weeks ago. So cool, interesting. And then came across this yesterday, which is our current like code review view. So if people leave comments, it could look something like this, where like the
Yeah.
comment blocks is within there. Then Marcel showed me another tool called CodeStream, and this is how they do their comments and suggestions. And then I saw this and I was like, oh, what happens if you combine rich text editing along with reviewing process? And it's like the rich text equivalent of like code reviews or reviewing. So imagine reviewing handbooks changes, but in a rich text environment. So it's very much like Google Docs or something like that. And I think it opens up the opportunity to kind of do different views. Like this is a code view here, in here, this is a code view. It's Markdown, but this could potentially like there's a lot of things in here that I'm like glancing over, like highlighting and
Yeah.
line matching between code and rendered. But the high level idea is that if you could render the suggested changes out as well, so that when you're reviewing, you're like, oh, okay, I can see that like my suggestion to add this little bit will look something like that. But that's something that I know I wasn't focused on earlier, about what does the whole static site editor experience look like, not only editing but also reviewing, because at that time we were only looking at the editing experience and the flows associated with that. But now that Editor Lite is in the picture, it kind of opens the possibility of stuff, because the web IDE will be powered by Editor Lite as well, and that can render code. So yeah, that was my like 2 cents on this. That I think there's going to be some exciting stuff, not only in the editing space, but like within the product around commenting, but potentially even how you review text, which might be powerful for Markdown edits.
Yeah, this is really interesting. So this is in the merge request view. Like if you
Yeah,
click on
yeah.
the static site editor option, you would that's the view that you would see next.
So I think this is a little bit beyond like static site editors. So at the moment we
Oh, I
have,
see.
so if I jump into this thing here, uh, oops, clicked on the wrong thing. How can I see just one file itself? I just want to see the file. So the spirit of this. So right now, this is like editor light, and then at the moment you can open up like in Web IDE or edit inline here. So I'm gonna edit inline here. So this is what a Markdown page looks like right now today. Um, the the idea is that if it's Markdown, potentially how we do it is what I should be looking at soon, but we could have like a Markdown viewer of this. So then the rich text editor. So clicking on that essentially would then convert all of this into rich text, so that you could edit all this without the need of using Markdown syntax and things like that. And you have like headings and all the things that we were looking into the static site editor, and it's more like extending that experience throughout product editing experience. So
Got it.
this is also the underlining idea of the pipeline editor team doing their like pipeline editing using their editor tool that edits a YAML file. Potentially,
Right.
you click on that. Somehow, whether we're super opinionated on the file type, it dictates the view, or we give users that option. That's something that we'll decide at a later date, but definitely giving users control to change back and forth is probably a good idea to have, but probably the first instance of it with the spirit of being opinionated and default on to like just make the recommendation that, hey, this looks like a markdown file without being too annoying, like clippy. So um
Right.
yeah, so what I was saying is that like at the moment we have this in which is a code view, but if we can render this in rich text, potentially we could apply a very similar pattern to this world here, where, as you know from doing like code reviews research, where people are kind of highlighting some text and then making a suggestion and then applying that change themselves, because that's the easiest way to make an edit to a merge request. So you could open up the doors around reviewing Markdown to be uh, less confusing than it needs to be.
Oh, this is super interesting. My brain is like trying to wrap my head around how we'll all fit in together, but
Hmm.
I guess that doesn't matter yet. Because basically,
So
I'm trying to think like, so when you the different steps, and then when you would see it, but
yeah,
the
my
concept
my, my
makes
yeah,
sense
my
to me.
naive kind of view on this is that we would be able to render this part in rich text and this part in rich text. Um, then
Oh,
that calls it a day, and then over time we can like convert the comment box to be a rich text one, or keep it as is, or whatever is right for the situation. But yeah, so it could be like you're reviewing code or reviewing text, and they could have different experiences because it's all underlying the same framework, so that you can swap things in and out potentially.
interesting. And like, who's the target audience? Is it kind of everybody who needs to review text, just in general?
And I would say it's the same persona as the person that we're trying to solve for, uh, Eddie, where we're looking at making it easier for them to write Markdown. Cool. We're making it easier for that person to write Markdown. But when it comes back on the other side, reviewing Markdown is probably harder than writing Markdown. So I think it's just an extension of a job to be done in their scenario where it's reviewing. So the persona of Eddie encompasses like content editors, writers, technical writing. So I think it has similar similar scenarios, similar personas and roles, but yeah, it's in a different context of reviewing. And I think we were heavily focused on creation, and I think reviews is definitely a key part of creation, especially in a collaborative environment.
Yeah, this is super interesting. I think, as you probably already know, there will be a lot of interesting design considerations
Oh yeah,
there, it looks like. So,
yes. And that was a 5 minute like mock-up. So yeah, there's a lot of holes in that visual thing that I just showed you. But
yeah. Oh, okay. I have your video with Marcel on my little YouTube watch later
mm,
playlist. I'm like, I need to carve out the time because I am
mm,
very curious to see the whole everything brought together. From what it sounded like, it was kind of like a history and then where you're going kind of conversation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You're basically
Cool.
a YouTube star already. On your way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
but so now that you've got that, you've also got all the nav and setting stuff. Where are kind of your priorities slash your mind? Where is your mind mainly these days?
That's a very good question. That's something that I've been trying to work out over the last 2 weeks because in personal life with schools returning over here, it's just like adjusting for pickups and stuff has been a little bit more challenging than I expected. So yeah, we have some solutions along the way for there, but from a work perspective, the focus time for me, I think, is still looking at this solution validation for setting search. That's like a big priority. Starting to make a move on the top nav so that we can get some engineering work to start looking into that. I think we're very confident around moving merge requests out of general and then creating issues around that, and then seeing, and feel free to chime in if we should be a little bit more cautious around there. But I think there's enough signs pointing to that. So those are my core focus. There's a lot of other things around, yeah, the editor experience, consolidating the review and the commit tab. So that's the web ID specifically. So
Yeah, there are a lot
yeah,
of things. There,
yeah.
my head
So I'm
is
just trying to
spinning.
follow in your footsteps, Catherine, jumping into groups in like areas that are complex. Like I see you jumping between code reviews and our stuff, and it's just like, oh, you do it very gracefully. So yeah, I'm
It's
trying to
like
learn from you.
you just have to like. There's these buckets of things. Thankfully, I guess I cycle through meetings every week. I think that's what keeps me like, okay, we talked about this last time, we talked about this, and then we're doing this. But
Mm.
yeah, right now, there's been that stuff, but then also like the documentation thing coming in, and then also, well, before it was a system usability scale that was taking a lot of mind space, and I was like, okay, navigation and settings is creeping up again. But then like documentation, I'm like, no, 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 no. Let's cut the scope of that. And then there's also some things about the merge request widget that, or whatever it should be, the MR overview page, because I don't know, the widget is like potentially a widget of widgets. I don't fully understand. I was talking to Pedro and Kai was like, I kind of see it as like there's a merge request widget, and then there are also other widgets from other groups and categories, and I'm like, oh, I thought these were all just one cohesive
Mm.
widget. So anyway, there's a lot of discussion around that as well. Like, how did this thing even come to place? What are all the different use cases and jobs to be done being kind of like addressed on this page? Like, who's even
Mm-hmm.
using this widget?
Mm.
So that's another area that's been interesting. But
Mm.
yeah, with navigation and settings, I think where I'm at now is just like there's a lot of information. Now it's just organizing it and breaking it down into steps. Like similar to what you did with this epic, I think I should do some similar things, or to the best of my ability, that you did with this simplify the menu options
Oh
for
yeah.
project groups epic. I think that would help because there are some different areas. I think there are IA related things, but from the benchmarking, it almost feels like that's like not the most severe thing. This concept of the contextual access to things and maybe like what we were talking about, the landing pages for the different
Mm-hmm.
sections, or even making the project overview maybe more useful. Things like that seem to be potentially more helpful as well, because
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's interesting.
Yes. Yeah, you reminded me. Landing pages and left nav integrate interactions is also another thing that's big, or like it's on my plate. So
Yeah.
where should these pages land? Should they just land on themselves, or do we continue with these
Yeah,
secondary pages? Yeah.
I think we need to have, maybe in our next, I think our next sync will be next week actually,
Mm-hmm.
just a session about that, because
Okay.
I was setting up a card sorting activity. I swear this is my last thing. I keep saying
Mm-hmm.
that. I was setting up a card sorting activity, and so I had to basically go through all the items on the left sidebar to make them cards. And I was going through them and I was like, so much of this I don't personally know whether how useful or how often it's used, because there were basically so many list views.
Mm-hmm.
Almost every item has a list view,
Yep.
but then there are also ones that were very just specific things you can do, like comparing branches, and then filtering certain things in that one view. That's like this one section, and I was like, I feel like some of these things could be connected together somehow,
Mm.
part of whatever workflow it's occurring versus separate pages. But then I'm like, maybe usage data would say otherwise, and people
Mm.
are interacting with all these different pages all the time. But
Mm-hmm.
it just seems like maybe there's something around improving that, the landing page, but also just how they all connect together. Like, yeah, basically. More to follow, but that I think is going to be a big part of this, maybe even more than um, changes to menus and such.
Mm. Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
All right. So we'll wrap it up for this week, and then
for this one.
all right. Bye everyone. I'm just gonna stop the recording now.